That's a little bit trained here in Israel. Isaiah 53, who's it talking
They would
about?
probably say it's either the people of Israel or a righteous remnant of the people of Israel, right?
Shalom, my friends, and it's time to debunk, once again, some charlatans. This time, this is Seth Postel and Elam Broshi from One for Israel, regarding their mistreatment, not only of rabbinic texts, but also of the Hebrew Bible, regarding the suffering servant of Isaiah 53. So without further ado, let's get into it.
So the suffering servant is the people of Israel or a righteous she'erit?
A remnant.
A remnant.
Correct. So that's true. And in fact, and I'm always surprised that we keep seeing more videos being put out against Isaiah 53 being about the Messiah. And what's surprising to me is that there's such clear evidence that it cannot be about the people of Israel. And one of our greatest examples is from Jeremiah.
Now, just to be fair, ancient rabbis did see it as a Messianic interpretation.
Yes.
Right? Ancient rabbis did see it as talking about as the servant being the Messiah,
Absolutely.
right?
So the Targum, the Aramaic translation of Isaiah 52, verse 13, behold my servant, the Messiah.
So once again, we did this in our past video where we debunked what Pastor Eduardo and this individual here, Jeff Morgan, claim, right? We can see it in the video, and it's all based on Dr. Michael Brown stuff, right? We know this. We've seen this time and time again. So what we know is in the Targum, right, it explicitly mentions not just the Messiah being a part of who the servant is speaking about, and this is Isaiah 52, verse 13. It also mentions the collective group. Remember, in Isaiah 53, it says a singular pronoun he. But in Isaiah 52, verse 14, right? It says their brightness being worse than that of sons of men, not his brightness. And this is the Targum translation. So not only does the Targum include the Messiah, but also, at the very least, the righteous remnant. And you can go to Isaiah 53, verse 10, for example, where it mentions the same idea, where it says their days will be prolonged and their sons and their daughters might multiply. Even though in the original text of Isaiah 53, we all know that it's referring to a singular he shall prolong his days. If the Targum is validating the Christian idea that Isaiah 53 can only refer to the Messiah, then why is it also mentioning the remnant of his people being purified and that their sons and daughters will have prolonged days and multiply? But these individuals do not allow the text to speak for itself, and instead they Dr. Michael Brown knows and make up whatever they want to fit their narrative. And you can see, and I put this in the video that I just did with Pastor Eduardo, and I even put Tovia Singer mentioning this explicitly.
I started Tai Chi at 50.
Sorry
now I'm
for
68, and Dr.
But you can see
very
right here.
aptly understands that Zephaniah 3 verse 9. I'll play it again for you. Just a second as this
Sorry for all these ads.
goes away.
Mashiach, my servant, the Messiah. But then when you begin 53, it says it's talking about all the nation of Israel. Why do people sort of look at that verse and not this verse and quoting a professor and quoting a thing? Well, my witnesses declares the Lord, and Avdi, the exact same word as Isaiah 52 and 53. That's the same. That means the servant is plural, not singular. Now, I want to explain why people misunderstand Talmudic texts. So they don't understand Jewish position. I really should rephrase that. I don't mean to say that in a disparaging way. Forgive me for that. What I want to convey is that people do not understand what it is that Jewish people believe about Isaiah 53. We do not believe that Isaiah 53 is speaking about the righteous remnant of the Jews and not the Messiah. We don't believe the Messiah is not included in that. The Messiah is a prominent, the most prominent figure at the end of days of the righteous remnant of the nation of Israel. And that's why the Talmud says, if you want examples of what will this remnant be like, of course, please do look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16.
Zephaniah chapter 3 verse.
Right, so this is the verse that is used. And he also mentions the Targum. If you watch this video, you can see we went through this ad nauseum. But you see, these individuals actually take a slightly different approach, and you'll see. And guys, please like, share, and subscribe if you like what you're seeing here, because we need to shut down this nonsense. They're perpetuating literally the same lies. If you've seen my video here, it's the same lies, just perpetuated in a slightly different fashion. So keep watching and you'll see what I mean.
And so they saw it as an individual. But what I want to do today is I want to look again and, okay, Rashi interpreted Isaiah 53 about the people of Israel, you know what, 1,100 years after the New Testament.
So once again, and you'll see in this video, right, I brought up Origen, right, the church father who agrees with Rashi, right, who was 800 years prior to Rashi, that
our Muslim brothers
Sorry.
and sisters in Yemen are
This
dying
is-
and in desperate need of your
all
help.
right.
Without
So
Of a single individual, right? Not
So
with some,
you'll see in this video here, this is from the Jews for Judaism website,
right?
and it makes it very clear that Origen, an early church father, understood 800 years prior to Rashi that the Jews of his time understood Isaiah 53 to be about not just the Messiah, but also the collective group, at the very least the remnant. And that's exactly what, you know, Tovia Singer was referring to. And he mentioned in Zephaniah chapter 3 when it says, the remnant of Israel shall not commit injustice nor speak lies, neither shall deceitful speech be found in their mouth, right? That is very clearly echoing Isaiah 53, verse 9, where it says, because he committed no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. I dare any Christian to put Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 13, side by side with Isaiah 53, 9, and tell me with a straight face that this is not about the righteous remnant when it refers to the servant. The cognitive dissonance must be wild going on in any Christian's mind looking at Zephaniah 3, verse 13, side by side with Isaiah 53, 9. It's clear as day, and you'll see we're going to get even more specific as to why the servant refers not just to the Messiah, but to more than one person. Anyway, keep listening and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
However many years, 1,800 years after Isaiah. But why do I have to go to Rashi's interpretation of Isaiah 53? Why wouldn't I begin with the earliest interpretation that we actually have on Isaiah 53?
So, like I said, and we see here in this video again, Tovia Singer even acknowledges that the Targum, and this is what I meant to focus on earlier,
Dr. Solberg, where he says this. This is what Tovia Singer is saying is the official rabbinic position on Isaiah 53 and who the servant refers to.
What I want to convey is that people do not understand what it is that Jewish people believe about Isaiah 53. We do not believe that Isaiah 53 is speaking about the righteous remnant of the Jews and not the Messiah. We don't believe the Messiah is not included in that. The Messiah is a prominent, the most prominent figure at the end of days of the righteous remnant of the nation of Israel. And that's why the Talmud says, if you want examples of what will this remnant be like, of course, please do look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16, that the nation of Israel will be humble and there'll be no deceit in its mouth. The same exact words as Isaiah 53. So the Targum, you're right, and Isaiah 52 says, Anti-Missionary, my servant, the Messiah. But then when you begin 53, it says it's talking about all the nation of Israel. Why do people sort of...
Right, so you see, and we already saw this. I showed you earlier in the Targum. That's what he's referring to in Isaiah 53, verse 10, when it says, their sons and their daughters shall prolong their days. It's not just referring to the Messiah. So, no, this isn't something that Rashi made up. Seth Postel and Golan Broshi are once again Dr. Michael Brown-nosing, right, making it very clear that they do not care to look at the Targum, the earliest source that Tovia cites as well, and recognizes that it supports our position, the rabbinic position that is held, that it does not refer only to the Messiah, but to a collective group of people, at the very least, the remnant. Anyway, let's keep watching.
we actually have an interpretation of Isaiah 53 that was written 100 plus years after Isaiah wrote Isaiah 53.
And it is?
Jeremiah
So-
11.
So it is an inspired interpretation.
That's the point. In other words, it's an inspired interpretation. And so I would love to just read Jeremiah chapter 11, verses 18 through 23.
So this is fascinating. This is a take on this that is basically dancing around and staring right in the face of the interpretation that, and this is a very fascinating take, right? That they're using Jeremiah to say that Jeremiah is implying what they believe about Jesus. And you'll see that makes no sense. That actually he applies it to himself. And they acknowledge this. You'll see what I'm talking about.
And we'll talk about it because I guarantee that some people are going to hear this and they're going to freak out and they're going to say, uh-oh, what are we going to do with this? So let me just read it, okay? Context, again, Jeremiah is hated by everybody. He's hated by the religious leaders. He's hated by the kings. He's hated by everybody. He's a rejected prophet. He's a suffering prophet. And at some point, the people of Anatot want to put him to death. They want to kill him. They want to murder him. They're sick and tired of him. And God makes Jeremiah aware of their assassination plot. And so in this context of being somebody that's hated, somebody that's abused, Jeremiah quotes Isaiah 53, 7 and 8. And I'll show it to you.
Okay, let's hear it.
So it says in verse 18, Jeremiah 11, 18, moreover, the Lord made it known to me, and I knew it. Then you showed me their deeds. But I was like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter.
Now, I can see the Hebrew, and the Hebrew is almost identical.
It's almost identical.
Verse 19, the words are almost identical to Isaiah 53.
So this should be a very clear indicator that what we claim about Isaiah 53 is inclusive of not just the Messiah, but also Jeremiah. Because what are they referencing? They are referencing in Isaiah 53 the language that is used when it says, like a lamb to slaughter, he would be brought, right? So they're saying that contextually, it appears that in Jeremiah chapter 11, when Jeremiah refers to himself, he's using an expression of a lamb to slaughter, right? It's almost identical to the language. So anyone thinking of typology or, foreshadowing, whatever, Jeremiah seems to fit the bill exegetically here, and they're acknowledging this. Yet, you'll see how they try to whitewash this and pretend like Jeremiah doesn't apply here, but they can't escape, and I'll show you why. And once again, please like, share, and subscribe, because we need to shut down this charlatanry. It's being perpetuated and brown-nosed beyond recognition at this point. Like, people don't even realize what's going on. So please like, share, and subscribe.
Okay, but not only that, not only is it almost identical to Isaiah 53, verse 7, okay? We say, okay, that's what we would say in Hebrew, a chance, fuchs, okay? But then let's keep going on, okay? Again, but I was like, verse 19, but I was led like a gentle lamb, led to the slaughter, and I did not know that they had devised plots against me, saying, let us destroy the tree with its fruit, and let us cut him off from the land of the living, that his name be remembered no more.
It's the same words from Isaiah 53:8 now.
Exactly. In other words, the cluster of unique vocabulary here in one verse in Jeremiah that brings us back to an almost identical verse in Isaiah 53. And what's interesting is Jeremiah sees himself very much as somebody that's hated, despised, that people want to kill.
And he chooses to identify with the person that is described in Isaiah 53?
100%. It's almost undeniable.
He said 100%. So what is the issue here? All we have to do, remember, in order to debunk the Christian position on Isaiah 53, is prove that the servant can be applied to more than one person. Because the Christian position, as you see in this video that Pastor Eduardo and Jeff Morgan try to say, is that they claim that the servant is sinless, right? They claim this absolute sinless nature of the servant, and they claim that's why Israel cannot be the servant. If you watch this video, you'll see them perpetuate that myth. These people, Golan Broshi and Seth Postel of One for Israel, you think they believe any differently? So their goal is, even in the face of so obvious exegetical prophetic fulfillment in Jeremiah, right, of Isaiah 53 and him being referred to this, they'll look for any sort of chink in the armor to try to deny any association with Jeremiah. Even though he's admitting this right here, you just heard it from the horse's mouth, that he's identifying with the servant. they're still going to deny that it applies to Jeremiah outright. And they're going to use that sinless card, which, once again, they can't keep perpetuating this lie when you see in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 13, explicitly that the servant is being identified with as the remnant, when it uses that same parallel speech of deceitful speech shall not be found in their mouth. And then you look at Isaiah 53, verse 9, and that same language is used. It's undeniable. But you'll see how they try to skirt this away and whitewash it and pretend like it has nothing to do with Jeremiah. But as you'll see, there's more references to the remnant that they cannot escape from, even if they try to whitewash this one. And also their logic is completely backwards and makes no sense.
Deniable. In fact, I would say that anybody that would deny that Jeremiah is citing Isaiah 53, I think they're doing it for polemical reasons, but not for biblical reasons.
So wait a minute. So Jeremiah is reading Isaiah 53.
Correct.
And he's identifying it with himself. This is what I'm going through.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no question that he takes this passage. So let me stop and say this, and it's really important. By virtue of the fact that Jeremiah alludes to Isaiah 53, 7 and 8, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He takes that passage and he applies it to himself.
An individual.
What that means is that he was reading Isaiah 53 as somebody from among the nation of Israel that's being rejected and abused and hated by the people of Israel.
So Jeremiah interpreted the suffering servant as an individual from Israel, within Israel.
Within Israel.
So you'll notice they keep emphasizing individual as though this makes any sort of difference. If we can prove, once again, that the servant is inclusive of anybody else aside from just the Messiah, we have completely debunked the Christians' obsession with Isaiah 53 having this exclusivity to Jesus, which completely destroys Christian theology, right? Because they're, ace in the hole is, Isaiah 53 can only refer to Jesus. But, and like I said, I've done this many, many times. In Isaiah 49, verses 3 through 6, I've done videos with Dr. Michael Brown and, Pastor Eduardo, and all of these people, they claim that when it says, he said to me, you are my servant Israel in whom I will boast, they claim that this is secret code word for Jesus, which obviously it's not. Nowhere in the Hebrew Bible is the word Israel referred, exclusively to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else, aside from a Christian eisegetical interpretation of Isaiah 49, verse 3. Oh, it's secret word, code word for Jesus here, and only here is the only time that it's used that way, right? And then in this video, I explain the hypocrisy of, Matthew in chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, where out of Egypt I called my son, refers to a sinless Israel in the immediate context, but they'll have no problem using that as typology for Jesus, right? So why would there be a problem with a quote-unquote sinless Israel being referred to here in Isaiah 49:3, when Matthew has no problem applying out of Egypt I called my son in Hosea 11, which is clearly speaking about a sinless, rather a sinful Israel, right? That they'll apply it to a quote-unquote sinless Jesus. So what is the problem with applying the remnant here? Or at the very least, Isaiah himself. He said to me, you are my servant Israel in whom I will boast. But while we're on the topic of Jeremiah, let's look at these verses here. It says, the Lord who formed me in the womb as a servant to him said to bring Jacob back to him, and Israel shall be gathered to him, and I will be honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God was my strength. Well, if we look in Jeremiah chapter 1, we have some interesting imagery here. It says, when I had not yet formed you in the womb, I knew you. And when you had not yet emerged from the womb, I had appointed you. A prophet to the nations I made you. This is God's words to Jeremiah specifically. Interesting that they didn't want to bring this part of the prophecy up, right? In the immediate context in Isaiah 49:3, right, we see that this servant who is being directly addressed to, God is speaking to Isaiah. So the original meaning of this can easily apply to Isaiah. If we look at the straight meaning of the verse, who is the me? Obviously Isaiah. You are my servant Israel, about whom I will boast. But why couldn't this also apply to Jeremiah? When you see the womb imagery here, the goal of Jeremiah is not just to be a servant to the rest of Israel, right? To bring Jacob back to him, but also this same servant here in Isaiah 49:3 was identified as Israel. He said, "It is too late for you to be my servant to establish the tribes of Jacob and bring back the besieged of Israel, but I will make you a light of nations, so that my salvation shall be until the end of the earth." What did it say in Jeremiah chapter 1? The womb imagery, and also that he is a prophet not just to Israel, but to the nations. So Isaiah 49:3, which majority of Christians agree, Dr. Brown agrees, this refers to the future Messianic era. He claims this is secret code word for Jesus here, which obviously makes no sense. But this same servant, who will be a light to the nations, who's formed in the womb, not yet formed in the womb when I knew you, this applies to Jeremiah exegetically. So here we have two very clear, not just about the Messiah, right? It's also about Isaiah and Isaiah 49:3-6, and also Jeremiah. And the rabbis have no problem identifying the servant with the remnant, of both of which Isaiah and Jeremiah are clearly a part of. Unless you want to be a silly Christian and claim that they're dumb, deaf, blind, ignorant servants who are liars, then why do you follow their words? Because Christians create, as I discussed in this video here, they claim that Jesus is the sinless servant, the true Israel, and everybody else is a dumb, deaf, deceitful servant. So they leave no room for the remnant, and they exclude Jeremiah and Isaiah as having any association with this, even though they are explicitly alluded to here. He said to me, "Who's the me? You want singular pronouns? Then deal with it. It's Isaiah and Jeremiah, if we actually want to typologically look at the scriptures in this way." Anyway, moving on.
That's hated by his own people.
Exactly.
And so this, by virtue, right here, by virtue of the fact that that's how Jeremiah understands it, the earliest inspired interpretation of Isaiah 53 goes completely against the understanding that Isaiah 53 is talking about the righteous remnant that's hated by the Gentiles, or that the people of Israel that are hated by the Gentiles. It is not how the earliest interpreter of that passage understood it.
Actually, there's an earlier interpretation of that passage that happened prior to Jeremiah that Seth Postel is ignoring. That comes from Psalms 44. Remember, his standard is the language used regarding a lamb or sheep to slaughter, right? When we look in Psalm 44, right, written by King David himself, right, we're speaking about the concept of the righteous remnant. And what happens in this verse? Well, you see here in the book of the Psalms, it says, "All of this has befallen us, and we have not forgotten you. Neither have we betrayed your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor our steps turned away from your path. Even when you crushed us in a place of serpents, you covered us with darkness. We forgot, if we forgot the name of our God and spread out our palms to a strange God, will God not search us out? For he knows the secrets of the heart." So these are people who have not forgotten the covenant, the righteous remnant. "For it is for your sake that we are killed all the time, that we are considered as sheep for the slaughter." Wow, that same imagery used in Psalm 44 regarding multiple groups of people, right? Multiple people, not just one singular individual being crushed, right? The Lord wished to crush him. Well, the righteous remnant who has not forgotten the covenant of God is being crushed here. Same imagery. And then you have, to top it all off, the sheep, the lamb to slaughter, right? That's what's going on in the psalm. So you have multiple groups, multiple people, not just the Messiah, not just Jeremiah, right? You have this all incorporated even before Jeremiah. So this prophecy is not just about Jeremiah being hated by his own, but the remnant being hated by the world. That's what the psalm is about, the oppression of the remnant. And we know this because of the destruction of the temple. Jeremiah wasn't just oppressed by his own people. He was also oppressed by the Gentile nations. And we can't forget that. And that is what Jeremiah's message is for. Not just Israel, but for the nation. And we see this in Isaiah 49:3-6. the chronology is that the message is of the servant, the remnant, is for the rest of Israel to bring them back to him, and then ultimately in the future Messianic era for that to also be for the whole world, so that the salvation will be a light to the nations to the end of the earth. This hasn't happened yet because this step has to happen first. That is why Jews put an emphasis now on bringing back our own, because ultimately there will be salvation for the nations. But the chronology is not the Jews missed our Messiah or some nonsense like that. It's more, we are bringing back our own to Torah, and then the nations will follow suit. That's why it says in Zechariah chapter 8 that the nations will come to the Jews for the truth. And there's a reason why Zechariah chapter 8 is not mentioned anywhere in the New Testament. Jesus didn't fulfill any of this. As I speak about over and over again on this channel, Christians, explain to me what this verse means. What fasts do these refer to? Do you fast on Tisha B'Av? No. Do you celebrate these days as festivals of joy? No. These are all temple fasts that regard the destruction of the temple, and rabbinic Jews are the only individuals who have any relevance to this prophecy throughout the past 2,000 years and beyond. So don't tell me that Jesus fulfilled this already. Don't tell me that the apostles fulfilled this already, because there's a reason. The smoking gun is that Zechariah 8 is not quoted anywhere in the New Testament, and this is clearly a future messianic prophecy that Jesus failed to fulfill and has no application to the church, the apostles, Jesus, none of that. It is all related to rabbinic Jews, and we have the receipts to prove it. Anyway, moving on with the video.
Okay, so wait. So you're telling me Isaiah 53 was fulfilled in Jeremiah?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, so what are you saying?
And that's a really good question. Okay, we are not. A lot of people want to talk about double fulfillment. Okay, what was fulfilled in Jeremiah and then later fulfilled by Jesus. We're not talking about double fulfillment here. And it's really important to understand. This is not an issue of double fulfillment, okay? What I am saying is that Jeremiah takes a passage and he applies it to himself. But does that mean that Jeremiah understood it as a fulfillment? What we're going to see is that Isaiah 53, even though Jeremiah uses it and identifies with it, we can see 100% why Isaiah 53 cannot be referring to Jeremiah.
So there's a proof from Jeremiah 11, a proof that it cannot be fulfilled in Jeremiah.
Absolutely.
Jeremiah cannot be...
So we already see he admits that he's using verses and applying them from Isaiah 53 to himself, such as the lamb to slaughter imagery, right? And he's still fighting against this interpretation. Like I said, you don't just have to go to Jeremiah 11. You can go to Psalms 44, right? You can go to Micah chapter 6 or 7, I believe it is. In Micah chapter 7, you have a passage that also refers to a group of people being... You see here, like, it uses the same language referring to more than one person, right? Nations shall see and be ashamed of all their might and place a hand upon their mouth, and their ears shall become deaf, right? They shall lick the dust as a snake who crawls on the earth. They shall quake from their imprisonment. They shall fear the Lord, and they shall fear you. This is referring to the imagery in Isaiah 52 of the Gentile kings who shut their mouths because of not just the Messiah, but for the nation that is being vindicated, right? As described, the remnant, right? In Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 13. He will leave over your midst a humble and poor people, and they shall take shelter in the name of the Lord. The remnant of Israel shall neither commit injustice nor speak lies, neither shall deceitful speech be found in our mouth. That's not just about the Messiah, my friends. That is the remnant. And that is what is being referred to in Isaiah 53, verse 9. There was no deceit in his mouth because he committed no violence. It's the remnant. There's no way around it. You cannot divorce the remnant from the interpretation of Isaiah 53, not in the times of the Targum, not in the times of Jeremiah, not in the times of the Psalms of King David. You cannot. It's all there. It refers to more than one person. There's no way around it.
The suffering servant from Isaiah 53.
And here we have it. So let me just give you the big picture, and then we'll narrow in. So in Jeremiah's use of Isaiah 53, it's in the context of God's wrath. Okay, it's in the context of God's wrath, and he's being abused by his people, and we're going to see that God ends up pouring out wrath upon the people of Anatoth, and ultimately Jeremiah's rejection resulted in God's wrath, not forgiveness. So let me read verse 20, Jeremiah 11:20. But, O Lord of hosts, who judges righteously, who tries the feelings and the hearts, let me see your vengeance on them, for to you have I committed my cause. Verse
Wait, so Jeremiah is asking for vengeance.
Yes, which means he's already not fully identified with the servant of the Lord.
Because the servant of the Lord in Isaiah 53,
His mission is to save the people. He suffers on behalf of the people. But let me keep reading.
So once again, this is the flaw in this, right? They're creating these false dichotomies. The idea that Jeremiah is inclusive of the servant is fine. The idea that the future Messiah is inclusive of the servant is fine. The idea that Isaiah is inclusive of the servant is fine. The problem is when you force the interpretation that this can only refer to one specific individual, whether it be Jeremiah himself and only Jeremiah himself, and or the future Messiah. It does have multiple fulfillment because we see that same imagery applied to the remnant. There's exegetical proof for this, right? If his whole premise is that because Jeremiah is compared to a sheep to a slaughter, that he's using Isaiah 53 to apply to himself. But he's ignoring the greater context described in Psalms where more than one person is given that description of being taken as a sheep to the slaughter, right? For the sake of God's, it says, for your sake, we are killed all day long. So this isn't something that is, in a vacuum or something, right? It is for your sake that we are killed all the time, that we are considered as sheep for the slaughter, people who follow the covenant, who do not break the covenant, the righteous remnant. So that includes more than just the Messiah. And that's what Isaiah 53 is all about. And ultimately, if we actually understand the chronology of things, and we respect what's happening here, we cannot say that Israel is somehow going to fall off the wagon and the Gentiles are going to pick up the torch and then the Jews are going to be walking back with their tail between our legs saying, we should have believed in Jesus the whole time. The opposite is true. We saw this in Micah, that the nations will be ashamed. Why? Because they're the ones trying to peddle this idolatry that these individuals are trying to peddle because they missed the message. They failed the test. There's still time to come back though, and that's why I'm making this video. You can be that light to the nations. You don't have to fall for the falsehood that the nations are peddling. What is the healing to the nations? The healing to the nations is what is described in Zechariah chapter 12 and 14 when it says that all the nations are going to come and recognize who really the servant is referring to, right? Or what we saw before in Zechariah chapter 8, when it says that they will say that God is with you. They'll come up to the Jew and say that God is with you. And once again, Zechariah chapter 8 wasn't fulfilled by Jesus. This can only apply to rabbinic Jews, as we saw earlier. Explain to me Zechariah 8 verse 19, Christians. You can't. It doesn't apply to you. It only applies to rabbinic Jews.
Verse 21, therefore thus says the Lord concerning the men of Anatoth, who seek your life, saying, do not prophesy in the name of the Lord, so that you will not die at our hand. Therefore thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I'm about to punish them. The young men will die by the sword, their sons and their daughters will die by famine, and a remnant will not be left for them, for I will bring disaster on the men of Anatoth the year of their punishment. So it's clear that Jeremiah cites Isaiah 53 because he identifies with being abused and being treated like a lamb that's led to the slaughter. But he doesn't quote, or he's not actually, he's focused on wrath. In other words, God's response to the mistreatment of Jeremiah is wrath, not the forgiveness of sins. And vengeance.
So once again, you're creating a false dichotomy. We're not saying that this is exclusively about one singular individual. The timeline in Isaiah 49:3 through 6 is speaking about an extreme stretch of time, to the times of Isaiah, to the future era of the Messiah. So right now, we're still in the phase of trying to bring back our own, back to Torah. Once that happens, then the nation of Israel will serve as a light to the nations. And then they will be coming to us, as it says in Zechariah chapter 8, and they will say that God is with you. But that hasn't happened yet. So be patient. recognize that the healing to the Gentiles has not taken place, and you can delude yourself all you want and say that Jesus healed you or whatever, ultimately, you wouldn't need to have a second coming cope if that actually happened. And the New Testament would have no problem quoting from Zechariah chapter 8, because we know it didn't happen. And that's why it has a problem quoting from it, because where did Jesus fulfill Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19? Or any of the rest of the chapter? He didn't. So we know that this healing to the Gentile nations has not taken place yet, no matter how much you claim that they worship the God of Israel, when Abraham never worshiped Jesus. Moses never worshiped Jesus. King David never worshiped Jesus. So you can keep telling me that you worship the same God that Abraham did when you have no evidence to prove that he did. You worship another God who Israel does not know. And that is why you failed the test of Deuteronomy 13. It's as simple as that.
But Isaiah 53, Isaiah's talking about a future exodus. Isaiah's actually talking about future forgiveness.
Redemption.
Redemption. So the redemption of the nation is tied specifically to their mistreatment of the suffering servant. So for instance, let's go back. If we look at verse 53 we'll start in verse 4. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried, yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed.
Verse 6.
All we like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. Jeremiah didn't die for the iniquity of the people of Anatot.
They died.
They died for the way they treated him. And so the contexts are completely different. And here's what's really remarkable.
It's not completely different because, once again, right, it's an isolated situation that will ultimately culminate in the future Messianic era. But Jeremiah is a part of that. When the Gentile nations recognize their folly, they'll realize, okay, so Jeremiah was suffering, right, because of the suffering that he experienced in the book of Eicha, right? That was as a result of the nations not recognizing he speaks about that. If you look in the book of Lamentations, right, he doesn't just say, Israel is a bunch of, I want wrath on only the people from Israel who attacked me. He expands that to Edom will ultimately be taken care of if you look in the book of Lamentations. And that hadn't even happened yet, right? It was referring more specifically, obviously, to the Babylonians who destroyed the first temple. But Jeremiah even incorporates Edom in there. So this idea that they can only focus on what Jeremiah is experiencing in that moment is very myopic and missing the big picture. Otherwise, he would have cited Psalms, which uses the same imagery of the remnant being, taken as sheep to slaughter, just as the, Isaiah 53 is referred to as. But no, you want to create this false dichotomy and say, well, this rabbi said this, so we have to commit to this interpretation and ignore all the other ones to make it look like rabbis contradict each other. On the contrary, rabbis, if you're going to use the midrashic application of, Matthew chapter 2, verses 14 and 15 to say, out of Egypt I called my son, and refer that to a quote-unquote sinless Jesus, even though the context refers to a sinful Israel who worshipped Baalim in the context of Hosea 11, chapter 11, verse 1, then you better allow for Isaiah 49:3, when it refers to Israel, for that to refer to not just the Messiah, but to Isaiah himself, to Jeremiah, who was also formed in the womb, who was also given the task of being a prophet to the nations, not just to Israel, right? It's all inclusive of that. But these individuals are not looking for that. They're trying to ignore, even when the imagery is right in front of their face. They have so much chutzpah, not the good kind of chutzpah, but this stubbornness to ignore this and say, no, this can't be about Jeremiah. This can't be about Isaiah. When it says, he said to me, you are my servant Israel in whom I will boast, that's secret code word for Jesus. Like, me means something completely different here. But singular individuals we'll just focus on that. And it can only be the Messiah. But Ask them to show you anywhere else where the word Israel is used to exclusively refer to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else other than Isaiah 49, verse 3. They won't be able to do it because they have no standard for who the Messiah is supposed to be. As you know, Hosea chapter 3, verses 4 and 5, my favorite Messianic prophecy. The Messiah will come at the end of days, not before the destruction of the temple. He is mentioned separately from God. He is not David their God. And it will be after a long exile when we do not have a king and we do not have a sacrifice. Yet, these individuals would say that Jesus is our sacrifice and our king. That's not in the Tanakh, folks. You're literally worshiping a different God than the God of the Hebrew Bible, and it's really sad.
Golan. Here's what's really remarkable, is that at least within rabbinic interpretation of Isaiah 53, there is one rabbi, one very famous rabbi, Saadia Gaon, who actually argued that Isaiah 53 is about Jeremiah.
Wow.
Why did he say that? Because of Jeremiah 11. But what we would argue is it can't be referring to Jeremiah. But what's important for us here is that Jeremiah identifies with the sufferings of this suffering servant. But what's even more important for us, Golan, and this puts an end, it puts an end to the arguments of anybody that would claim that Isaiah 53 is talking about the suffering of the people of Israel for the sake of the nations.
Yep.
That is, that the earliest interpretation is an interpretation that identifies the suffering servant in Isaiah 53 as somebody who's a prophet sent by God to the people of Israel, and Israel as a nation rejects him. Israel as a nation puts him to death. Israel as a nation says, we don't want you. But in their treatment of this suffering servant, they are redeemed. It's the suffering servant suffers not so that God will pour out his vengeance upon Israel. He suffers so that God can forgive Israel.
Amen, amen. Okay, but then...
So once again, all of this ignores the earliest interpretation, which actually comes from the Psalms, right? This is a collective group of people. It is not a singular individual. And we also have Zephaniah demonstrating that parallel language of the deceit in their mouth, right? It says no deceit will be found in the mouth of the remnant, right? Neither shall, there's not going to be lies or deceitful speech. Why is the servant described in the same way in Isaiah 53 if this was supposed to be some sort of unique thing that only the Messiah is capable of? It's not. So everyone, please like, share, and subscribe so we can put this to bed. Enough of these lies. They're literally saying the same Dr. Michael Brown nosing lies over and over again. Rashi made up the idea that Isaiah 53 refers to the collective group of people. It always was about the Messiah. We already went here in the Targum. This is the earliest source from rabbinic, texts that says explicitly that it refers to more than one person, not just the Messiah. Not only does Jeremiah identify himself with the servant, Isaiah 49 verse 3 demonstrates that Israel refers to a collective group of people, which just as much applies to Isaiah himself, as well as Jeremiah in the womb imagery, in the imagery of the being a servant to the nations, as we saw earlier. There's no way around it. And then ultimately, we see in Psalms 44, the being crushed, just as the servant is crushed, and being led as a lamb to slaughter, considered as sheep for slaughter, killed for the sake of God, not for some, evil reason. These are people who are following the covenant. So there is no way around it. Isaiah 53 is not just about the Messiah according to the rabbis, and not just about the Messiah according to Jeremiah, and not just about the Messiah according to Isaiah. It is about the righteous remnant, ultimately the nation being brought back through the process of teshuvah, as it says. We're going to be brought back through the remnant, and ultimately then we will, Israel will serve as a light to the nations, and only then will Zechariah chapter 8 be fulfilled, because it clearly was not fulfilled by Jesus. So hopefully in the future, and we know this will happen because we have the emunah that it will, it says, so said the Lord of hosts, in those days, when 10 men of all the languages of the nations shall take hold of the skirt of a Jewish man, Ish Yehudi, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. This did not happen in the times of Jesus. Explain to me Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19, if you want to argue otherwise, Jesus didn't fulfill any of this chapter. That's why it's not quoted in the New Testament. That's going to be your healing, my friends. Isaiah 53 doesn't exist in a vacuum that could only be fulfilled over 2,000 years ago. It is still ongoing. We are still in the process of bringing back the rest of Israel. And ultimately, we will serve as a light to the nations. So I hope this video has been a blessing to you all. Please like, share, and subscribe. Shalom Aleichem.